what's shaking, everybody? We're back. It's another edition of the Orange Bloods Texas Football Channel. I'm Jeff Ketch, and that is Anwar Richardson. And today, we're talking about the Texas offensive line in 2022 and whether or not Steve Sarkisian's approach, specifically for 2022, his approach to go with offensive linemen versus maybe stacking up guys from the portal was the right approach. Look, do us a solid, like this video, subscribe to the channel, especially if you're brand new. Like, join the video, subscribe to this channel, and I promise you we will try to inform you on a daily basis. Get those notifications, tell your friends about us, and by all means, leave comments in the comments section. Okay, so Anwar, I pitched this video to you, this idea of a video earlier today, and I do so with the acknowledgement that we all have to state from the very beginning that landing a couple of 5 stars and some 4 stars along the offensive linemen in 2022's recruiting class and building the best offensive line class in the history of the program is a really good thing. I feel like before anybody thinks that we don't think that, we should state that from the beginning, that when you start looking at 2020, 2023, 2024, and even into 2025, the fruit from this recruiting class is almost certainly likely to be providing dividends that, potentially take this program to a higher level than it's been, certainly going into the SEC. But from a specific 2022 season standpoint, I think there's a conversation to be had about whether or not they should have been more active in the portal going for offensive linemen. Should they have maybe taken a couple of less offensive linemen to save spots for the portal? Or do you just go with the young kids and you let them grow up just like the other positions on this team on some level, and that really and truly you're playing for 2023 and 2024 anyway? Let's just start the conversation there. When I talk about what should have been or what would be the perfect approach for building the offensive line this year up while also getting the optimal level of improvement specific for this upcoming season, what would you have done if you were in control?
Ketch, I think what I would have done is kind of taken the approach that they took with the receiver room, which was identifying the guys that they say, you could probably find a home elsewhere. And if you do, let us help you. We'll help you back. and I think I would have taken that approach and said, okay, I have no issue with them taking, obviously, the high amount of offensive linemen that you're there. You take as many of those guys as you can. When I covered the NFL, John Gruden used to always tell me, when I was covering the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, that there are not a bunch of athletic 300-pound men walking the face of the earth. So when you find those kind of men that are walking the face of the earth, you grab them in bulk. So that's on the offensive line, that's on the defensive line. You make sure you grab as many of those as you can. But then what I would have also done is done a fair assessment of the guys who were there last season and identified, hey, it's probably not going to work out for you here. Probably need to go have somewhere else to play. The same way that we saw the attrition catch that happened in the receiver room. And then I would have then stacked up some more offensive linemen there, try to get at least 2 guys in the portal that I feel like would have been upgrades. Because, you can't say nobody in the portal would have been an upgrade. Like, that's, we're not, no one's going to stand on the table and say everybody was great last year. So they found upgrades in the portal, in the receiver room. That probably would have been my approach, Catch.
Kind of the Alabama approach, right? It looks like their starting left tackle when they play Texas in week 2 of the season is going to be a left tackle transfer from Vanderbilt. Mm-hmm. And yet we know that they would have taken DJ Campbell or they would have taken Kelvin. You know what I mean? Like, they wouldn't have turned away elite level offensive line prospects, but they didn't close the door on whether or not they would go into the portal. I don't know if anybody would ask Steve Sarkisian this, and I don't know I don't know if he'd ever give us a truthful answer because of the implications of the answer to this question. But I wonder if part of the reason why he was able to land a Devon Campbell or a Kelvin Banks or even a Malik Agbo late in the process, they sold the idea of playing time. They sold the idea that Texas versus the other choices that a lot of these kids were making, that Texas had the fastest avenue to a starting job, to getting on the field. And I wonder if part of the recruitment included not taking any guys in the portal. I wonder if there was a very off the record, hey, we're not going to land you and tell you the entire recruiting process that we think you can come in and be a starter at left tackle or right guard or right tackle or whatever. And then the moment you put pen to paper, we're going to go out and get someone from the portal that immediately becomes competition for you and makes it harder for you to do the things that helped us land you in the first place. I think it likely happened. It's one of the only things, it might be the only thing that explains why they haven't gone into the portal at all, right? I mean, not like some of the other positions, not like on defense. When we talk about edge rusher or linebacker, we know they've tried. There have been players, really good offensive line prospects that a lot of major colleges, including Alabama, have wanted to target to try to improve their offensive line. And Texas has been like, no, we're good. And it's going to be a thing that's talked about throughout this season. It was a year ago when they made the decision not to go for offensive line help. So I think that the quiet part that you're not supposed to say out loud is that when we have this conversation about the portal, they may have felt like unless they hadn't given this private promise to not go into the portal, that maybe they wouldn't have gotten all the players that they did, and maybe that was their preference. I'm kind of with you. I probably would have waited on all of the guys they waited for, but I wouldn't have taken early commitments. And I probably would have gambled with the notion of if I don't get elite, I can get pretty good and experienced in the portal, and we'll run it back and try it all over again in 2023. The question is, how good can this offensive line be in 2022 with these freshmen? It's a bit of a rhetorical question, but if we're trying to answer it legitimately today, do you think these young kids can come in and be dramatic improvements? And if so, how long does it take?
Yeah, I mean, so we're not. Everyone knows we're not overcooking the grits. Like, this is something that a problem that Sarkisian has addressed was the offensive line during the spring. To the point, Ketch, we didn't have a spring game because he didn't feel like they had enough depth on the offensive line, and all the reports that we had all throughout the spring, Ketch, said that the offensive line struggled, the defensive line was having a better day, and we know that you can't fall for that banana in the tailpipe again because last year they thought, well, that means the defensive line is going to be so great. And that didn't turn out to be true.
Yeah.
So it's kind of like when you see the defensive line is pounding on the offensive line, you don't know what that win really means in the big scheme of things. But yeah, back to you. What was your question, though, Ketch? I wanted to make sure I said that. What was your original question?
The gamble, and I think it's fair to call it a gamble, is that they will improve the offensive line this season through depth. How realistic is that really? And from your perspective, how long until it clicks in, right? Because maybe the answer is by midseason, these guys have hit their stride and now you're okay. Or maybe it's week one. Like, I guess, so that's the question. A, can they and how much? And then B, how soon will it take before they can?
So I have a question and then an answer and a question. So first of all, as relates to Kyle Flood, I feel for him going into this season. Like, you and I've talked about this before. I don't know how to fairly judge him, knowing that he's got so many young guys that he's working with. Like, if that line struggles, it's not like you can look at him and say, that he's not living up to expectations. It's like, dude's been handing a bunch of young folk. Like if I'm Kyle Flood, I would have probably tried to negotiate a raise in the offseason. I'm like, hey man, you asking a whole lot. They need probably two guys to hit, and so if you can find two that can hit right away, and by hit, I know it's always a subjective term, but probably need two plus starters, two guys, and I say plus from a performance standpoint, not more. I just mean people are giving you the advantage, and you probably need to find that. It's hard to, the guys arrive on May 31st. You got to get the guys into shape. They'll start working out in training camp, and maybe you figure out what your starting lineup is 2 weeks before the season opener, and then you go there 2 weeks in, and week 2 you face Bama, and good luck with that. So, but my question to you, Ketch, is from a recruiting standpoint, when you think of positions that miss, where does offensive line kind of stand and ranked as compared to quarterbacks, receivers, defensive linemen? And I know you don't have the numbers in front of you.
I got them in my head.
But yeah, what's usually the hit or miss rate when it comes to offensive linemen?
Inside the state of Texas, it's been disastrous over the course of the last 20 years. Offensive linemen from the state of Texas perform against their peers across the rest of the country. They're significantly worse off. I mean, the 5 stars hit like 5 stars are supposed to hit for the most part. So, I mean, it's 50-50. And that's kind of what you get. Boy, when you start sliding down beyond that, you're seeing position groups that should be hitting at 20-25%, hitting at 14-15%. And there's not really a recruiting tier with offensive linemen from the state of Texas over the last 20 years that get above that. I mean, it is – I'm going to pull it up so that I can look at the exact numbers. But, my God, when I did the offensive line study a couple of years ago and then updated it fairly recently, you just look at the numbers and say, okay, it's something along the lines of about 14% of the best 70 offensive linemen in the last 20 years from a recruiting perspective have turned out to be plus college players who NFL teams view as draftable commodities when it's all said and done.
14%?
It's not good. It's not. And that's the reason that question and the answer to that question is why I would have taken fewer high school guys and I would have taken more portal players. Because if you're telling me like the kid from Vanderbilt that's going to Alabama, that guy started over 20 SEC games in his career. At worst, you're getting a guy who's going to be serviceable for you. He can play. It's a little bit like the Calvin Anderson discussion from a few years ago. It never looked like he was on the verge of being the best player in the Big 12 at his position, which I think they've got hopes for guys like Campbell and Banks that's who they become. But you were able to slide him into the most important and critical position on the offensive line. And for a year, you didn't have to really worry about left tackle. I think one of the things that's a little bit scary about the question we're trying to answer is I agree with you. They need 2. I mean, whether they're freshmen or not, they need at least 2 new starters on that offensive line. They need 1 at left tackle. And even if Kelvin Banks is a hit and it's 50-50. Kelvin Banks is no better than a 50-50 proposition as a high school prospect coming to college. And that's really good. Like, if you hear me say 50-50, that's not me like taking a dump on the kid. That's me telling you that's as good as the math gets. If he hit, but that means he hits over the course of 4 years. The mathematical probability that he hits from day one, 10, 20%, like it doesn't happen all the time. And just because Texas A&M was able to have a couple of guys do it a year ago, surrounded by NFL players, but I should say, right? Like they weren't having to do the heavy lifting. They had first-round draft picks in the lineup helping those guys. It's tough to I just know the math to say, oh, yeah, Kelvin Banks is going to show up, and he's absolutely going to be day one the answer at left tackle. Such a huge ask. And if they miss, if they're wrong, it threatens the viability of this season to be bad at left tackle when you have a freshman quarterback who's never really played in a game since his junior year in high school. It's the area that you'd want to be the strongest in. It's probably their biggest question mark on offense. And I hope forever. I want to cover a really good team this season. I don't want to wait. I would love, even 9-3 sounds really good. Anwar, like
I take it today.
If you told me right now 9-3 today, I'd snap your hand off.
Right.
Give it to me. Give it to me. 9-3 don't make the Big 12 championship. I'll still take it because that feels a little exciting. Like, at least going into next year, I feel like people are excited. The demand at that point to play in a Big 12 championship and win it in year 3 intensifies. But a 4-game improvement, sign me up. It's little things like, hey, are you going to – when Will Anderson comes to town from Alabama, do you have a left tackle in place that can keep him from getting 4 sacks in that game? I don't know how to answer that question. And I don't know – I feel like it's completely unfair to expect Kelvin Banks to be the answer this year. And that's not a Kelvin Banks issue. I feel like I would say that about just about any offensive lineman who's a true freshman. It can be done, but it's a bit of a statistical anomaly. And depending on statistical anomalies, sounds just more dangerous than I typically care to live.
Yeah. And what's interesting too, Ketch, is one of my final thoughts on that. It goes kind of a question. Typically, Coach, when coaches have been hired, it's been, year 3 is kind of like, all right, that's where the expectation kind of comes in there, and that you kind of waited for there. But in this era of the transfer portal, where you don't necessarily have to wait for guys to develop. You can take guys who have been developing in other programs and plug and play. Does the expectations that you place on a coach kind of almost intensify a little bit more in year 2 than it would have done in previous years? Does year 2 become the new year 3?
I mean, that is a great question. I think it depends from school to school. Mm-hmm. And maybe even it was for Charlie Strong, and it kind of was for Tom Herman. And that Tom Herman answered the call kind of in year 2 and then floundered moving forward was part of his undoing. I think if you go 5-7, year 2 becomes year 3 in most circumstances. I will say the support for Steve Sarkisian from within has been so strong that I don't get the sense that anybody's nervous by what happened last year with that 5-7. It's what makes me think that the answer is probably no, with this specific situation. Is this really year 3 for Sark? I feel that way coming into the season. I wonder if I'll feel that way midway through the season. But my instinct says no for Sark specific, mainly because there's just no doubt at this point that from a loyalty standpoint, it feels like the fan base and the administration and the donors are really in his corner.
Yeah, and I didn't even mean it from a will he lose his job thing. I just mean when
I know
when the fan base starts saying like, oh, okay, wait, what the heck is going on here, so on and so forth. That's where I was kind of going with that one.
I completely understood what you were saying. Okay. Wasn't
I don't want someone to go crazy and start saying, "Oh, these guys are talking about Sark lose his job in year 2."
No,
like it's nothing. We haven't gone nothing stupid like that.
I feel like that would be quite a leap of where we are in this specific conversation. I think last thing I'll say, and I don't have the numbers right here in front of me. It kind of makes me mad that I don't quite have it the data right here in front of me. I'm trying to scramble to find it, but the rest of the Big 12 is going pretty heavy on offensive linemen in the portal. Texas Tech has signed 5 guys. Oklahoma's gone back in for a couple of guys. You could pretty much go through every school in the conference and see that they've gone for help for the offensive line through the portal. And I mentioned this in a video that we did a few weeks ago. It'll be really fascinating to see when Texas plays Texas Tech in September, what Tech's offensive line of transfer portal guys looks like compared to what Texas by game 4 will be doing with its true freshmen, and which for each team proved to be the wiser decision for immediate improvement. I don't know that I have an answer, but other Big 12 teams are going to go out of their way to try to tell us. And if this doesn't work at all, you'll absolutely have Texas fans who will be pointing to other schools in the Big 12 and saying, every school in the Big 12 decided to upgrade its offensive line through the portal except for Texas. There are probably consequences in the way of public favor if you get that wrong. But it's important to remember that you can't be so short-sighted as to have the 2022 conversation without acknowledging from the very beginning, like we did, that from a 2023, 2024, 2025 perspective, the approach they took is the right approach. They're closer to answering the long-term questions than they otherwise would have. But from an immediate improvement standpoint, I think the jury is still out. Well, look.
Hey, Ketch, got a quick question for you.
Yeah.
You remember yesterday when we did a Overreaction Monday show and we gave away the Delta, was it Delta 9 gummies?
Yes.
If there was a coach on the staff who should receive some free Delta 9 gummies, is it Kyle Flood?
No.
For the upcoming season, who would you give them to?
Kwiatkowski.
Oh.
He's got Gary Patterson's shadow hanging all over him. I want PK to just be chilling.
Okay. All right. I'll probably give mine to Kyle. You give yours to PK.
I'm just saying, there's a lot of pressure on PK, probably more than anybody in the program outside of Sarkisian. I want that guy sleeping well at night, if at all possible. Fair. Hey, do us a solid. Leave your comments in the comment section with regards to this. How would you have built the offensive line class? What do you think would have made the 2022 offensive line? What's the optimal answer to that question? And oh, by the way, like the video, subscribe to the channel. We will be back with more videos throughout the week. For Anwar Richardson and myself, thanks for watching. You guys take care of each other. Later.